Today, we're firing up a two-wheeled time machine and checking out some of the fastest motorcycles from the 1970s to the 1990s that we wish could rev back into our garages. These iconic machines captured hearts and turned heads, whether they were homegrown or simply tearing up roads across the states. So grab your helmet, settle in, and let's relive the rides that fueled America's need for speed. Ready? Let's roll. Number 20, 1972. Harley-Davidson XLH Sportster 1000. This legendary American icon from the early 70s might not look like the most aerodynamic machine by modern standards, but it could hustle down the highway faster than many folks expected. The Sportster 1000 boasted a 997 cubic centimeter V-twin engine that delivered around 55 horsepower, which was plenty for quick getaways and that unmistakable rumble. People called it Ironhead because the cylinder heads were made of cast iron, and this gave it a rugged persona. Sure, it was a bit heavy, and the vibration on long journeys made your arms tingle, but that was part of the adventure. The benefit was a bulletproof build and a raw riding experience that only Harley could provide. Controversially, some folks complained about oil leaks, but longtime owners just shrugged and said, "That's how you know it's a Harley." It remains an American classic with a timeless silhouette that still commands respect at bike rallies. Number 19, 1973, Triumph Bonneville T140. If you thought the British only made tea and crumpets, think again. The Triumph Bonneville T140 arrived in the early 70s as an updated successor to the T120, upping displacement to 744 cubic centimeters. It was nimble for its time, had a decent top speed of around 110 miles per hour, and it was absolutely dripping with that classic British design. Some folks argued that Triumph was losing ground to the faster Japanese imports, but the Bonneville still held its own in cafe racer circles. Kickstarting it could be a workout, which might be a drawback if you skipped leg day, and yes, it leaked oil occasionally. Must be a 70s bike tradition. The T140 featured a parallel twin engine that produced a satisfyingly throaty growl. Even though reliability was sometimes iffy, riders loved the minimalistic aesthetic and the proud Triumph badge. It was a slice of old-school cool that gave its lucky owners a blend of grace and grit on American roads. Number 18, 1976, Honda CB750F Supersport. This was the hot rod version of the bike that changed motorcycling forever. While the original CB750 dropped jaws in 1969, the 1976 CB750F Supersport brought a racier edge. It had a 736 cubic centimeter air-cooled four-cylinder engine that could push speeds past 110 miles per hour and made roughly 58 horsepower, a solid number for the mid-70s. Honda refined the exhaust into a 4-into-1 system, providing a throaty snarl that thrilled enthusiasts. The Supersport styling gave it a slightly more aggressive stance compared to the earlier models. There were critics who missed the classic four-pipe setup, but most folks agreed the lighter exhaust boosted performance. One lesser-known fact is that Honda insisted on rigorous testing to ensure American riders got reliability and all-day comfort. Drawbacks? The single-disc front brake felt a tad underpowered by modern standards. Still, it's revered as the bike that continued Honda's revolution of accessible, powerful street motorcycles. Number 17, 1977, Ducati 900 SS. When you hear Ducati, you might immediately picture sleek red fairings and throaty L-twins. The 1977 900 SS was one of the bikes that solidified Ducati's racing DNA and captured the imagination of U.S. riders seeking Italian flair. With its 864 cubic centimeter desmodromic engine producing about 70 horsepower, the 900 SS was a genuine speed machine of its era, capable of hitting around 135 miles per hour. It flaunted clip-on handlebars, a racing seat, and that hallmark 90-degree V-twin design. Handling was razor-sharp for the time, though the riding position could be tough on the wrists if you like to tour. Some folks griped about the finicky carburetors and the somewhat temperamental electrics that occasionally gave riders an unplanned roadside break. But the 900 SS's success in racing, particularly in endurance events, made it a legendary presence. Jokes aside, it's a slice of Italian passion that still sets hearts aflutter at vintage shows across America. Number 16. 1977. Moto Guzzi Le Mans. Mark 1, it's easy to forget that Moto Guzzi was quite a formidable player in the performance scene. The Le Mans MKI arrived in '76 and continued making waves through '77, showcasing that distinctive transverse V-twin engine that stuck out like a pair of wings. This 844 cubic centimeter machine punched out around 71 horsepower, letting it flirt with the 130-mile-per-hour mark. Some critics argued it wasn't as race-focused as other Italian offerings, but owners fell in love with the bike's stability, shaft drive, smoothness, and surprisingly comfortable ride. The cafe racer styling with the bikini fairing was pure eye candy, turning heads on American roads. A drawback was the heavy clutch pull, which could give your left hand a workout. Fun fact, the Le Mans was named after the famous French race circuit, and it built a cult following in the US for its combination of solid engineering and European style. Number 15. 1979. Yamaha XS1100. Stepping up in displacement, Yamaha's XS1100 was known to some as the 11 or the XS11, and it was quite the beast for the late 70s, with a 1,101 cubic centimeter inline-4 producing around 95 horsepower. It was capable of impressive quarter-mile times under 12 seconds, which was serious business back in the day. Shaft-driven and surprisingly plush, it could devour highway miles with ease, but it also had enough grunt to embarrass smaller, sportier bikes on the street. Some critics called it top-heavy, and it was indeed a handful in tight corners if you didn't show it some respect. At about 600 pounds wet, it wasn't light, but once you got rolling, it felt unstoppable. Its reliability earned it plenty of fans in the US, though the styling looks decidedly 70s. Despite that, its robust engine design made it a go-to for riders who wanted a cruiser that could really hustle. Number 14, 1979. Kawasaki KZ-1300. Kawasaki already had the legendary Z1 to brag about, but the KZ-1300 took the mania to six-cylinder territory. Yes, you read that correctly. A 1,286 cubic centimeter straight six engine that gave the bike an otherworldly smoothness and serious bragging rights. It churned out around 120 horsepower, which was mind-blowing at the time, and that allowed it to push beyond 130 miles per hour. Some said it was more a muscle bike than a corner carver, given its hefty weight approaching 700 pounds. Fuel consumption was notoriously poor, a definite drawback if you plan cross-country trips. And let's not forget the complexities of maintaining a six-carb setup. However, the KZ-1300 remains an outrageous piece of motorcycle history, especially in the US, where bigger seems to always be better. Not everyone knew that it was once pegged by the press as a potential touring platform, which it eventually became with the Voyager. Talk about a majestic brute. Number 13, 1980. Harley-Davidson Sturgis FXB. Harley wasn't done exploring performance, and the FXB Sturgis proved that the motor company had some styling tricks up its sleeve. The bike was named after the famous Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in South Dakota, a place that feels like a second home for Harley lovers. Powered by the classic 80 cubic inch, 1,340 cubic centimeters, shovelhead V-twin, the FXB was a factory custom that combined a blacked-out look with orange accents to honor the brand's racing heritage. People gushed over its stripped-down, chopper-inspired attitude, but it wasn't exactly a track slayer. Some folks found the vibration at higher speeds a bit jarring, and the shovelhead engine could be finicky if neglected. Yet it symbolized Harley's survival during a tough era for American manufacturing. Many enthusiasts in the US still want this model back in their collections because it's a perfect snapshot of Harley's rebellious spirit. Number 12. 1982 Honda CX-500 Turbo. In the early 80s, turbocharging was the next big thing in motorcycling, and Honda jumped on the trend with the CX-500 Turbo. It took the regular CX-500's 497 cubic centimeter transverse V-twin and equipped it with a turbocharger, bumping horsepower from a modest 50 to around 78. That might not sound like a lot now, but it transformed the bike into a rocket by early 80s standards. It boasted fuel injection, rare for the time, and a space-age fairing design that looked futuristic. Drawbacks included turbo lag, which meant you had to wait a second before it kicked in, and the added complexity made maintenance a challenge. Yet its innovative spirit gained a cult following among American riders. Interestingly, the CX Turbo was more expensive than many larger displacement bikes, which limited its sales. These days, seeing one on the road is a treat, a testament to Honda's bold engineering adventures. Number 11, 1982, Yamaha Seika Turbo. Not to be outdone, Yamaha offered its own turbocharged marvel, the Seika Turbo, also known as the XJ650 Turbo. It took a 653 cubic centimeter air-cooled inline-four and added a turbo for an output of around 90 horsepower, which back then got your heart racing. Visually, it stood apart with a swoopy fairing that screamed early 80s sci-fi. There were rumors of iffy reliability around the turbo seals, though many owners claim that was just a matter of proper maintenance. The Seika Turbo was quick once the boost kicked in, giving riders that surge of adrenaline they craved. Some lamented the abrupt transition from off-boost to on-boost, which could catch you off guard mid-corner. Nonetheless, it was a technology showcase for Yamaha, and for a brief, glorious moment, it looked like turbos were the future. Americans appreciated its innovation, even if the trend didn't ultimately replace traditional performance tuning. Number 10, 1984 Kawasaki GPZ 900R Ninja 900. Here's the bike that kicked off the Ninja craze. The GPZ 900R combined a 908 cubic centimeter liquid-cooled inline-four with a fairing that was aerodynamically ahead of its time. It was the first production bike to crack the 150-mile-per-hour barrier, shocking everyone in 1984. People loved how it was lighter than its competition, handling corners with the kind of agility rarely seen on bikes of that displacement. It produced about 115 horsepower, which propelled it to 60 miles per hour in under 3 seconds. Quite a feat. The controversy, some called it too race-focused for daily riding. The riding position was aggressive, and it lacked some comfort features. Still, that didn't stop American riders from snapping them up. A lesser-known fact is that Tom Cruise's famous ride in Top Gun was actually a GPZ 900R, cementing its icon status for an entire generation. Number 9, 1985 Yamaha FJ1100. Yamaha was determined to prove that sport touring could be more than just upright cruising, and the FJ1100 was born out of that vision. With a 1,097 cubic centimeter air-cooled four-cylinder engine pumping out around 125 horsepower, it was capable of serious speed, often exceeding 145 miles per hour on open highways. Yet it also offered a fairing that made longer journeys a breeze. Critics noted that it felt a bit heavy in tight twisties, but once at speed, the bike handled surprisingly well. One gem of knowledge is that many owners discovered the FJ 1010 made a great platform for modifications, leading to some seriously hopped-up machines. A drawback was the outdated suspension by modern metrics, and the brakes could fade under aggressive riding. But in mid-80s America, the FJ1100 gave you comfort and performance, bridging the gap between a pure sport bike and a touring rig. Number 8, 1985. Honda VF1000R. Honda's VF1000R was a direct response to the world of endurance racing. It featured a liquid-cooled 998 cubic centimeter V4 engine that delivered around 113 horsepower, along with gear-driven camshafts that made a delightful whirring sound. The styling was a love-it-or-hate-it affair, with a full fairing that looked purposeful and those race-inspired dual headlights up front. It wasn't exactly lightweight, tipping the scales around 600 pounds, and that made it a bit of a challenge in slow corners. But open highways? It was as stable as a locomotive. Honda claimed some technologies from their race program trickled down, like quick-release wheels for faster tire changes in endurance pits. The American market appreciated the exotic vibe, though the lofty price tag turned off some buyers. Despite the cost, it represented Honda's push for cutting-edge engineering in a street-legal package. Number 7, 1986. Suzuki GSX-R750. The GSX-R750 is arguably the granddaddy of modern sport bikes. Suzuki basically transplanted race technology straight into a street machine, giving riders an aluminum frame, a high-revving inline-four engine, and a weight that was astonishingly low for the era, just under 400 pounds dry. Power came in around 80 to 85 horsepower, but combined with that light chassis, it flew through corners. The slab side fairings became iconic, and the racer crouch was unapologetically aggressive. Some folks found the riding position downright punishing on the daily commute, but track enthusiasts welcomed it with open arms. Suzuki also used an oil-cooled engine design, SAX, which kept temperatures in check without the complexity of liquid cooling. People forget that the GSX-R750 single-handedly pushed other manufacturers to up their sport bike game. It's a piece of performance history that changed American sport riding forever. Number 6, 1987. Yamaha FZR 1000. Yamaha launched the FZR 1000 as an evolution of their sport bike lineup, and it quickly gained a reputation as one of the fastest machines of the late 80s. Its 989 cubic centimeter inline-four could top 150 miles per hour and produce around 125 horsepower, with a chassis that felt stiff enough for track days but comfortable enough for weekend blasts. The distinctive Delta box frame design was derived from Yamaha's Grand Prix technology. Some owners discovered the engine had a broad mid-range, making it more forgiving than a peaky racer. The drawback was that it was still a big leader bike, so novices might have found it intimidating. One interesting tidbit is that it featured Yamaha's EXUP, exhaust ultimate power valve, in later models, improving low-end torque and smoothing power delivery. By the late 80s, American riders had a serious need for speed, and the FZR 1000 delivered in spades. Number 5, 1989. Honda VFR 750R, the RC30. The RC30 was Honda's ultimate homologation special, built so they could dominate world superbike races, and dominate they did. It came with a 748 cubic centimeter V4 engine producing around 112 horsepower. But more importantly, it was packed with top-shelf tech like gear-driven cams, a single-sided swing arm, and race-oriented suspension. It was outrageously expensive for a 750 at the time, around 10 grand, putting it out of reach for many. But if you were a lucky American rider who got your hands on one, you basically had a race bike on the street. Critics raved about its balance and the way it carved corners like a scalpel. Even though it wasn't the most powerful leader alternative, the RC30's quality and precision made it legendary. A lesser-known fact is that the RC in its name stands for Racing Corporation, hinting at its true purpose as a no-compromises track weapon. Number 4, 1990 Harley-Davidson Fat Boy. Harley brought out the Fat Boy as a statement piece, offering a muscular design that turned heads everywhere it rolled. It had an 80 cubic inch, 1,340 cubic centimeters, Evolution engine that delivered solid torque for cruising, and the iconic solid disc wheels made it an instant classic. Some critics said it was all show and not enough go, especially compared to sportier rivals. But that was missing the point. The Fat Boy was about presence and the all-American vibe. The seat was broad and comfortable, and the bike's stance was perfect for rolling down Main Street during Bike Week. A fun bit of trivia is that the name Fat Boy was reportedly inspired by the heavy, imposing look, though some conspiracy theories link it to World War II bomb nicknames. Drawbacks? It wasn't exactly nimble, and you could scrape those floorboards if you got too enthusiastic in corners. Still, the Fat Boy remains a dream machine for many middle-aged riders wanting classic Milwaukee steel. Number 3, 1992 Ducati 900 SS. By the early 90s, Ducati had refined its air-cooled L-twin formula into something truly special with the 900 SS. It had about 80 horsepower, but torque was the name of the game here. Riders fell in love with the mid-range punch and that sweet desmodromic valve soundtrack. It used a trellis frame that gave the bike a distinctive silhouette and made for outstanding handling. While not as all-out fast as the liquid-cooled four-cylinders of the time, the 900 SS provided a soulful, visceral ride. Critics pointed to shaky reliability, finicky electrics, and maintenance that could be pricey if you weren't handy. Nonetheless, this was a purist bike with minimal plastic, a half fairing, and an undeniable Italian flair that stood out on American roads. The lesser-known twist is that Ducati consciously tuned the 900 SS for real-world performance, not just top-end bragging rights, making it a favorite among riders who treasured corner carving over straight-line speed. Number 2, 1993. Triumph Daytona 900 Triumph rose from the ashes in the early 90s with a new line of bikes that combined modern engineering with classic British spirit. The Daytona 900 featured a three-cylinder engine, affectionately known as the Triple, displacing 885 cubic centimeters and making around 98 horsepower. That Triple gave it a distinctive growl and a strong mid-range, so it felt quick off the mark. Some critics pitted it against the Japanese leader bikes, noticing it was heavier and not as sharp on the track. But for many Americans, the allure of a reborn Triumph brand with an exotic Triple was irresistible. A lesser-known fact is that the Daytona name was chosen to celebrate Triumph's racing history in Daytona Beach, tying it neatly to U.S. motorcycle culture. The biggest drawback was that early versions had slightly questionable finish quality, but the core mechanicals were solid. It remains a signpost of Triumph's successful comeback on American soil. Number 1, 1994. Kawasaki Ninja ZX-9R. Here we are at the top. The 1994 Ninja ZX-9R arrived just when supersport competition was heating up. Kawasaki's new approach combined near-liter bike power, 899 cubic centimeter inline 4, with the agility more in line with a 600 class machine. It could rocket from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds, and topped out at around 165 miles per hour, making it one of the fastest street bikes you could buy in the mid-90s. The Ninja style, sharp fairings, bright green paint, was all the rage. A common gripe was that his chassis was on the flexi side compared to hardcore rivals like the GSX-R750, but many riders found the trade-off worth it for everyday comfort. A fun fact is that the ZX-9R was one of the first bikes to showcase Kawasaki's Ram Air system, boosting power at high speeds. It embodied the 90s pursuit of speed, and American riders jumped on that lime green bandwagon.